Thank you for being here at today's panel. So I'm thrilled to be joined by a fantastic panel of experts in the financial and automation space. My name is Nick Babinsky. I'm here with Billtrust. We'll be introducing our panel here shortly. But before we do, we want to talk about objectives. What is our objective for our conversation today? It is really to talk about some of the emerging trends that we are seeing in AP and AR, especially as we're seeing so much change in the macro environment. Many of us here are in the finance space, in the investment community, and we're constantly talking about what do we expect next. So we're going to be getting into some discussion about what are we seeing as we're talking to customers, as we're talking to businesses like yours, relative to what's happening in the AP and AR space and overall spend management and finance automation category. So we hope you're going to take away some anecdotes, some facts, some tangible actions based on what the panel has to offer today. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Harley to introduce himself and Ampla.
How's it going, everyone? My name's Harley Pasternak. I'm the VP of Finance at Ampla. A little bit of my background, I joined the fintech world in early 2019. I was an early employee at Brex and scaled with the company from about 100 to 1,200 employees, at which point I transitioned over to Ampla, where we are building financial software for companies in the CPG space and broader CPG ecosystem across the supply chain and retailers as well. Excited to be here.
Great. Itamar, co-founder and CEO of PayEm. PayEm is a spend management and procurement solution. Essentially, we have a suite of products from corporate cards, virtual cards, physical cards, AP automation, which is the reason why we came here. So processing of invoices in scale and dispersing payments in ACH, wire checks. And procurement solution, which means that we're doing what usually P2P are doing, but just more focus on the employee experience. Overall, PayEm is now 4.5 years old. We raised a total of $247 million in equity and credit. And very happy to be here. Yeah.
Good for you, Itamar. Our funding now seems ridiculous comparing to this guy, but Roi Ben Daniel, CEO and co-founder of Received. I'm a law and accounting graduate and also did master's in MBA in University of Chicago. So I speak the finance language, although didn't take that career path. I've been building and commercializing in fintech for about a decade. Most of that time has been spent at Visa, where I built the partnerships and ventures team in Tel Aviv, where we grew a profit center from scratch to dozens of millions of dollars.
Where we met.
Sorry? Where we met. The origin story. At Visa, that's where I saw the AR and billing opportunity, and also working with our customers. I saw how painful billing is for technology companies. What do we do at Received? We are an AR and billing system for technology companies. In the gist of it, the problem that we solve, the way we call it, is the revenue spaghetti. What does that mean? Technology companies have very complicated pricing models, complex contracts. We say that each contract in B2B sales is a snowflake, because each customer is unique, right? And then there's also usage data, right, in technology, and that we're going to talk about that in the panel, I think. There's the emergence of a pay-as-you-go pricing model, and all that at scale creates a huge complexity and pain for companies in automating the AR and billing, and we solve that. So thanks for coming, and this is me. Yeah.
So Harley, as the financial leader on the panel here, thinking about the teams, thinking about how you grow your business, how you need to run your operations, I want to start with you, and maybe at a high level, guide us through the AP and AR challenges that are most painful. What are you thinking about as a finance leader? What have you thought about when it comes to automating your processes and just focusing in on automation opportunities relative to this area?
Yeah, for sure. So it's a good question, Nick. And I think that when you start to think about back office functions, APAR, it's very different by industry. And so for us, for example, at Ampla, because we're a fintech and we move large amounts of money every day, it's really important for us to have really strong cash reconciliation processes. But there are other companies that I work with and advise that are in the SaaS space or CPG space. And for SaaS companies, it's really important to have revenue reconciliation and state-by-state understanding of tax implications, whereas CPG companies focus on things like trade deductions and promotional spend. So I think that as you're thinking about automating these processes, you really want to take a look at your industry and your company specifically, because as Roy said earlier, each company is unique and different. So,
yeah, that's a great point, Harley. And then Roy, maybe to you, you and I have long talked about how you focus your company on building around SaaS businesses and the challenges that SaaS businesses have relative to accounts receivable. When you look at the opportunity to grow your business and your customer base and your product, how do you think about what Harley said in terms of vertical focus? You mentioned customers being snowflakes in many cases that have special billing needs and challenges, but how do you think about the evolution of AR relative to customer focus and verticals?
Yeah, so we might disagree on this point, but I think that generally speaking, AP tends to be more generic than AR because buying processes and AP, money out movement, in most cases, if you think about spend management, why spend management grew so, in a viral way, it's because many businesses, also because the cashback, right? But also because it's really easy to adopt such a tool because a factory and a VC and a SaaS company probably have similar processes. That's not at all how AR and billing looks like, because the products and services that you sell to customers really mandate for the process, right? So think inventory, non-inventory, think high volume of transactions like for B2C versus high value transactions for B2B. And those just mandate for very different processes. So the way we think about it at Received, like growth engines and, where do we grow to? Currently, there's no really good solution for automating your AR and billing if you're a technology company, just picking up that speed, right? Just hitting that growth. There's Zuora, right? I mean, it's not like we don't have competitors, but their price point is crazy. And it's like, it's a very sophisticated and heavy system that's just not apt for a company with 100 employees, right? And the way we think about it is we find our niche, we go after, we build for B2B technology businesses. And I think we're going to stay in technology for a while. I mean, there's how do you build, if you want to automate billing for B2C, that looks totally different than B2B. Contract is not a thing, for example. Today we have a contract object that lets you really dig into the contract and see the value, what you're selling, the logic of each invoice, the milestones. That's an object. With B2C, it's more of like cohorts, right? The contract is consistent. So there's so much to do in technology, and it's like a huge space that I'm actually not thinking of any other categories at the moment.
That makes a lot of sense. So I think what we're hearing there is on the customer side, if you're buying AR, you really need to be cognizant of whether that solution is conducive to the way you run your business, the way you interact and transact with your customers, because it could be different. And then on the investment side, looking at AR businesses that have lots of runway within particular verticals, because those verticals that are larger may have very complex needs that need specialized platforms. Itamar, from a spend management perspective, from an AP perspective, do you agree with kind of what Roy was saying in terms of more horizontal in nature, in terms of the needs of customers? Do you see verticalized tendencies come about in terms of how customers are using your platform?
Yeah, I think I totally agree with Rui. I think also, before I answer your question, just to comment on what he said, I think PayEm not as a platform, but actually as a customer that as a SaaS company that have complex AR, when we were looking for an AR solution and look at Zohar and look at other solutions, we felt that A, doesn't fit, the sort of state of mind that we have in our revenue, or the complexity that we deal in our revenue. It was super expensive. And eventually we had to sort of like build it ourselves, which is something that if we were met you at that time, we would definitely go and buy, because we don't want to build necessarily if we can find a solution. And I do feel like AP, and that probably happens because there is an explosion of SaaS services with very creative revenue structures and very creative pricing, sometimes because just this is sort of the industry that you're dealing with. And I think AR as a solution haven't been developed yet to what we're seeing in spend management or AP. I think so AP, it is a more generic problem. And I think AP automation as an industry being, around for many, many years, I mean, compared to AR, it's probably way more with, giants like Tipalti or Avid or, but I really feel that the complexity of the of AP have shifted from where solutions were really focusing on automating the AP function themselves, so the folks that sits within the finance departments, to a more of a holistic challenges for the organization. That means that I feel like more modern companies, SaaS companies, are dealing with what I call sometimes collective decisioning. It's not just, it's not a manufacturer that needs to buy plastic for their floor. You're buying a piece of software, and there's multiple stakeholders within the organization that needs to approve it, needs to make sure that there's no exposure in InfoSec, in privacy, in legal, in budget ownership, and so on. So it's not so yes, you can call it AP, but in a sense, it's everything that comes before and after the transaction that is the challenge I feel now the industry is facing.
Makes a lot of sense. I will say, relative to AR and its kind of growth and prominence, we've been doing it since 2001. We just hadn't had our spotlight until the last decade or so. So it's fun to kind of see though how AP and AR have taken various pathways to prominence in the automation space and the investment community. Moving on to a bit about the mindset of financial leaders in this market, Harley. I want to dig into a bit of how you're looking at prioritization of tools that you're investing in and processes that you're automating. I think one of the things that we have been joking about leading up to this panel is that AP and AR aren't often the first things that we hear from like a CFO or a VP of finance that, we need to automate this. And I'm just kind of curious, like, why is it that you believe finance leaders like yourself may not, always be in the biggest of hurries to automate AP and AR?
Yeah, to your point, Nick, I don't think anyone ever got promoted for changing their AP or AR system. So that's probably why it's not front and center for most folks in that position. And I think generally, it's a sensitive topic because a lot can go wrong. Where I think that leaders need to be cautious is by letting things sit for too long untouched, because that results in a scenario where you have, death by a thousand cuts. And when you ignore things like AP and AR, then your team gets bogged down in a bunch of paperwork that you don't really have the time to focus on more strategic initiatives, and you end up bloating expenses in other ways, needing to hire a larger team, communication breaks down, there's a lot of manual work being done, and I think resetting the foundation cautiously and correctly the first time saves teams a ton of effort in the long haul, and then results in more accurate financials, as well as faster close processes. And that just kind of give confidence to the entire organization.
Got it. And maybe a follow-up to that, Harley, if you don't mind, is like, what are those signals then that when you're observing the team, the business, the financial operations, that you're saying, we're spending too much time on close. We're needing to hire too many people to do a process. Like, are there indicators that you look at, and how do you kind of manage those signals and knowing when to be prompted to make a move?
Sure. So, on the accounting side of our organization, we target a pretty expeditious close process. We have a 5-day close, which is very quick compared to most folks. And so it's something we pay a lot of attention to, and the way that we maintain that is actually an idea that one of my accounting managers had, and she came over from Big Four, and there, they pay a ton of attention to how much time they spend on any initiative because they bill clients. And so what she implemented across the team was at the end of every close process to go through and basically circle what are the items that we're spending the most time on, how can we make this more efficient, as opposed to we have all this time spent on this item, we need to hire a new person. And that was a really proactive way to go about this and ensure that we run a very efficient organization on that side.
Itamar, one of the comments you made to me, just because I'm more oriented in the AR space, less so AP and spend management, but one of the comments you made to me leading up to this event was around KPIs, measurables that you see customers commonly seeking out when procuring a software or solution like yours. But there's also some of the check boxes they're looking to hit that I didn't realize were associated with spend management. Can you kind of talk about the balance of KPIs and other meaningful outcomes folks are looking for when they're outsourcing or automating spend management?
Yeah, I think automation is definitely very important, and saving time on manual tasks is something that often being overlooked, but not always is the compelling event for putting the right infrastructure. What we're seeing is a lot of companies that getting to a point where they're thinking about going public. So it's usually like 2-3 years, before they're actually doing that, and they're trying to make sure that they actually have the right audit, in place. So everything that you change in the platform, somebody can actually see who was doing that, when, etc. You have SOX, right, that you need to comply to. So that entails tons of different financial processes that need to be healthy, need to be checked, and so on. And I really feel that sometimes when CFOs are seeing that they're trying to replicate processes in different platforms and in different territories, and they're trying to think, okay, how do I scale this up? I cannot throw 3 people every time that I'm opening a new territory. Like I need to put something that's going to speed up. So I think that's also other KPIs.
I want to add to that, to KPI and success, and also to the when question, like when do you adopt a system? I think because prepping for this panel, I try to think how can I be smart, talking about DSOs and cash cycle and these very sophisticated metrics. But to be honest, that's not the language that customers are using in early growth stage. Like when you're 100 employees and the finance teams is like 2 people, you're not going to meet the metrics that you're going to meet at Visa's annual report, right? So the KPIs and success and when to do it is for me, it's kind of the same question. Is the way we think about it is firstly and primarily, actually we save spend, right? It's IT spend. It can come in 2 buckets. One is building in-house, which is an incredible direct cost and actual opportunity cost. And the second bucket is IT integrators. As you grow, when you need to systemize, you need the same language and objects and data flowing between your sales and finance, meaning your Salesforce and NetSuite. Right? And many companies that we see bring in integrators, and we say that they develop toxic dependency on integrators because they come in, you pay for a very expensive service, and then you're stuck with the logic between Salesforce and NetSuite that is not flexible. And so for us, it's actually really easy to demonstrate that. You save whatever, dozens of thousands of dollars yearly. In the best case scenario, actually, engineers cost much more. And then the second part of it, which is actually they don't really follow, how much invoices were late, like how late am I and how much I don't collect. They're not at that stage that all the numbers are there, but they know it's not working. They know that the March invoices should be sent out on the 10th, not 1st of April, right? They know that it's enough for a few big bills to not be collected, for that to hurt the bottom line. Right, so I think that's interesting because when you grow, it's still experimentation phase. And just last point is, to Harley's point, what we see is that people, I don't know when's the right time, but people procrastinate because people are people. And then most of the CFOs and VP finance that we speak with say it's too late. It's like, I'm suffocating, it's not scalable, we hear misery. It's actually, we're happy to be their heroes and come and help them. There's probably a sweet spot of like identifying when it's too late and, making the buying decision 3 months earlier or 6 months earlier, so you're not in that danger zone, if that makes sense.
That makes total sense. I think as we're talking about the mindset of the financial leaders, kind of what's happening in the macro environment, I want to go through a round of kind of fact check, right? So we've seen some recent studies out of Gartner. It says 18% more spend in 2023 on software by businesses than 2022, right? Which I thought was a bit surprising in terms of seeing more spend this year than last year, right? We saw a survey out of NetSuite that said 75% of businesses will invest more in the CFO stack this year than last year. I think it was 11% being materially more spend, significantly more spend this year than last year, and then 64% of that being moderate spend increases in the CFO stack. Whereas I want to kind of fact check that because, Itamar, Roi, selling into businesses, are you seeing, more constraints in the buying process around budget? Harley, maybe starting with you, do you look at expenditures, investments different as it relates to your overall expense in your supply chain versus your software, right? Are you seeing increase in software expenditure versus overall? And how should we as a room be thinking about that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think with the broader macro backdrop, it's very important for companies to think about their overall spend and how they can keep efficient operations overall. That said, if you think about a typical tech company and you break down their expenses between the size of the team, and then there's larger items like rent and maybe your server expenses, Azure, GCP, AWS, and then there's a smaller bucket of basically everything else. And SaaS spend is within that bucket. But if you think about how much of the overall budget it really makes up, it's probably a single percentage. So it makes a lot of sense to me that with all these pressures to spend less across all the other buckets, that people would say, how can we be more efficient? How can we bring in software that might cost us, 0.2% more of the total budget to not expand any of the other larger buckets? That makes a lot of sense to me.
So more rational to invest in software because it's a lower proportion of overall spend, but you're driving return that you may not see returns in the rest of your supply chain with if you're to invest similar dollar amounts.
Yeah, 100%. If you have the option to purchase a software or grow an entire team from the ground up, purchasing the software is probably, the low-cost experiment that you would want to try first.
Roi, to you, are you seeing similar sentiments from customers that you're working with? Are you seeing, how do you think the macro environment is affecting some of the decisions that CFOs are making when looking at AR software?
Yeah, I really want to actually hear Itamar's point of view because he sees the SaaS spend in his system. But I'll just say a couple of sentences. It's obvious. It doesn't matter what the economist says. We're in a recession. Is that still a debate or okay? And what
raise of hands poll to see if it's we're there or not there. It's no.
What we're seeing is a system purge. That's what we're seeing. Every other CFO that we speak with are doing an audit for the systems their teams are doing. But they're not. They're still making buying decisions, right? So that may reconcile those two pieces of data, CFOs are telling us, show me how you save me a system. So I think there's more pressure on builders in any space, specifically on, people selling to CFOs, which are the gatekeepers, is ramping up on capabilities and, showing real concrete ROI and not just tales. So, yeah.
I think to your point, I mean, Itamar, you see how your customers are spending, right? And so what are some of those changes that you're observing in your data relative to the supply chain?
Yeah, so I think the biggest drop that we saw from the days of 2021 was a drop in media spend. So media spend went down like 35% from the peak. Cloud services and SaaS did go down, but again, it's like sometimes it's very hard to say like, is it related? Is it maybe they're been using usage based and they have now less headcount, or they decide that they're going to cut, some seats that were unused and so on, or is it they're just cutting their AWS usage and things like that? So it's very hard to be very granular, but I do agree with Harley. I think that if you can present a strong ROI, then you'll sell SaaS. And I feel like with PayEm, when we are approaching customers, they many times want to cut their long tail spend. They want to cut SaaS. They want to cut, the sort of like the single digit spend that they have, because they don't want to let people go, right? So they rather cut unused software and so on, but they don't have the visibility to do that. So they rather pay for a service that will actually give them a transparency into that. So if you show an ROI, I think that you can still sell software. Yeah.
Got it. I think, Roy, to you, I think one of the things that I've enjoyed learning about the Received platform is the fact that you're allowing businesses to dictate their pricing model, right? And how they're charging their customers. And I think one of the things that we're anticipating on our side is that, whether it be a move from subscription-based or seat-based pricing to more usage-based, so CFOs, financial leaders can kind of just pay for what they consume versus kind of building in price favorability for growth. Are you seeing customers, are you seeing an opportunity for businesses to move, to respond to the needs of the market, to be more kind of consumption-based in how they pay for things versus software?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't call it an opportunity, it's just that they have no choice. They just simply have no choice because, well, the flip side of what we just talked about, the system purge, is that, customers are coming to companies that we speak with, and they're saying, I don't want to pay upfront, that your nice SaaS model where I pay you $30,000, $50,000 a year upfront, that's gone. Well, not today, not this year, maybe in the future. I want to pay as I go. I want to move to usage pricing. And all of a sudden, companies that didn't even consider usage, and we see this a ton, now do usage pricing because they want to keep the customer, obviously. And with invoicing, again, at a certain scale, if you have 3 customers, okay, you're going to do fine with sticks and stones. But at a certain scale, you got to have a system. And a bunch of CEOs actually are telling us, my invoicing system is my pricing model or business model bottleneck. So that's, for us, it's definitely an opportunity. And maybe for companies, it's also an opportunity to be a bit smarter and more experimental, do more experiments with their pricing models, and who knows what good can come out of it. All of a sudden, you better optimize for your price point, which companies just don't tend to do, specifically in B2B, I think.
Yeah, I think it's the beauty of fintech applications is it puts financial leaders in a position to innovate, where historically they may have been stuck with an ERP, traditional accounting software, where you couldn't think about moving some spend to card, right, and generating some extension of capital or rebate, or changing a pricing model to win a deal. I mean, these are things I've heard firsthand many a times, where if you had those opportunities to respond, that would be impactful to the business. Harley, maybe to you, if I could ask you, are you looking at kind of any preferences in how software that you buy is priced? Do you have a preference around subscription and price certainty versus consumption based, or is it's kind of all based on the need?
So we're probably a pretty unique situation for a venture-backed startup, but we implement zero-based budgeting at Ampla. So we go through the price of by line item every single expense in the entire company. We do that on a fairly regular basis. And so we've got a pretty good sense of, exactly what we're using, what we're getting a return on that, and we keep an eye on that regardless of the macroeconomic backdrop, whether it's an expansion or a contraction. And by keeping that discipline in-house, we are able to make sure that we continually make positive ROI investments in any new software that, we're looking into.
Got it. Going back to you, Harley, on the topic of Roi, you mentioned the sticks and stones when you have maybe 3 customers, but how did you get to the decision around build versus buy and some of these processes that we're talking about, AR, AP? Harley, do you? I know you had mentioned that you did some build around AR, but for a very particular reason. So can you kind of go into that?
Sure. So because our products are engaged in fintech and we have accounts payable and accounts receivable offerings, we liked what we built and we decided to use some of it in-house. If that's not the case for a typical company, I would probably recommend going and seeing what's out there before starting to build things in-house. And the reason for that is twofold. The first one is that you have a large amount of resources that are dedicated on something that's non-core to your business. And so you're losing not only on, spending a large chunk of money, but you're also losing speed to market. And then the second is that you're building something for a single customer and you don't get to leverage the benefit, the learnings from an established system that serves, thousands or potentially millions of other customers in your segment.
Itamar, are you engaging with businesses that are making build versus buy decisions around AP and spend management, or?
Well, it depends what you call build. For example, like the AR, we had to build, and when I'm saying build, it's like there's R&D teams that actually building a solution, right? And then we are slow. We cannot innovate, we cannot do experimentation around pricing, and I feel it wasn't the right thing for us. And hopefully, we can use a product with customers. I don't think that we don't see customers actually build, when I'm saying build software around, but we do see a lot of sort of like homegrown solution, which means they built a process in Jira, they built a process in Google Forms, they have some sort of an automation around emails, things like that. It's cute. I don't know how to say it. It's nice. It's always, a little bit funny to see it. But it's always, for us, it's showing that there is a need for a platform, because at a certain point you cannot, work on Google Forms, and it can take you that far, but it's a start, so sometimes when you're a small company, it's making sense to do a little process.
To Harley's point, when we look up market, some of the teams that we speak with, now they have 5-6 engineers just doing billing when, they're a marketing tech company. And the CFO will be pulling their hair saying, why is billing on my product roadmap? Why are we even discussing? And it doesn't work. It's buggy. It's not your core competency. Why would you be successful with building a great billing system? It's very, very complex to build a billing system that can be flexible for a growing company and can take logics and objects and data flows. So again, not objective, drinking my own Kool-Aid here, but it's really what we're seeing out in the market, that eventually they're sorry for it. Yeah.
And as I think about the build versus buy, we often at Billtrust kind of get faced with a question from IT managers who are supporting a project with a CFO or a treasurer saying, well, why can't I just do this through my ERP or accounting system, right? Historically, we looked at those platforms as kind of an inch deep but a mile wide, right? And certainly you could do things like build out a form or build some certain workflows, but it really only lasts you so long. And I think that we historically have looked at complementing the systems. And I know that integration and connectivity has been a big point for these businesses up here. So maybe Roi and Itamar, can you speak to kind of the connectivity piece? Is that critical as part of your proposition? And then maybe Harley will finish off with you in terms of how you buy based on connectivity to your core applications.
I think actually this is a great point, because if we're talking about the build versus buy, like that is a very expensive build. And we did see a lot of companies that basically ask their NetSuite integrators to build approval flows or custom forms and so on. And it's not cheap to begin with. But really, the cost of ownership here is huge, because you have to, every time that you need to change a little, area in your flow, you need to call that company in Wisconsin or whatever that is, and and pay them a lot of money. And you create a dependency in your core business processes with a third-party provider that is, not agile, not fast, and very costly. So I think this is a very slippery route to take into that. Around connectivity, I think, at least for us, this is a key issue, because your spend is, it depends on many different elements in your flow. It's your financial servicer, so it might be your bank, to support different payment method, or corporate card issuer. It might be your HR, HRIS, right? Obviously, the ERP, and the connectivity within the organization. So it's not about just the buyer. It's about other stakeholder that needs to make sure that this transaction is legit. So I feel like putting in place, an infrastructure that connects all the points, it's definitely a key. Yeah.
Any thoughts there, Roi?
Yeah, of course. I mean, NetSuite is the sun that everyone revolves around. And as a builder in this space, the sooner you understand that, the better. It's not easy to connect to NetSuite and these core systems. Salesforce, for example, has its own challenges, mainly customization challenges, because companies, it's a generic system that a lot of companies, as they grow, customize. We view integrations to Salesforce and NetSuite as core to our offering. It's not on the edge. It's a threshold that if you want to do really, really well, you won't even get to a follow-up call with the decision maker. So I think actually, just a last thought, it's that there's kind of a broader theme of, is ERP gonna rebuild itself? How many solutions are we gonna see in the CFO stack? Like, okay, 5 or 50. I don't think the ERP is gonna build itself because of everything that we said on this panel. I do think that connectivity is key. So, new entrants to the space like Merge, Workato, Codat, Rudder, I think they're going to play a bigger and bigger role in this space.
Harley, anything to add there?
Yeah, the only thing that I would add there is I think that ERPs do an amazing job storing data. I would also challenge anyone to find a more expensive solution to do basically anything else. And when you think about innovation in ERPs, the more widely adopted solutions of QuickBooks and NetSuite, I'm sure people are familiar with. QuickBooks is 50 years old. NetSuite's 30 plus years old. There hasn't really been a lot of new technology here from kind of young, innovative, scrappy companies in trying to, fix this solution. And the other thing about ERPs is that there are a tremendous number of interdependencies. So if you can find, a third-party solution that fits really nice to and plugs into a NetSuite, QuickBooks, or other, that will save you a ton of time and stress.
Fantastic. So we're going to move into questions next, but maybe one more final question. So get prepared. Otherwise, you run the risk of getting called on if we have limited questions. So maybe final words from the panel, whether it be things like, do you see AP, AR coming together as a single platform over time? Parting words for financial leaders on things that they should have top of mind walking away from today's conversation. Parting words from each of you. Itamar, let's start with you.
As much as I love Roi, I don't think that AP and AR are gonna, bundle.
You're breaking my heart, Itamar, and in front of all this crowd.
It's something that we're getting asked, I think, quite a lot. But I think AP challenges or money out challenges and money in challenges are very, very different. Being, going, expanding and developing, but AR is not one of them.
So I can sleep safe at night knowing PayEm is not coming into the AR space. That is good. Roy, how about you? Parting words.
I would say simply like for the CFO, VP Finance, finance team crowd, buy from someone who builds for you specifically. I think that's becoming increasingly more important.
Yeah, I agree with both of those comments, actually. I think that depending on where you are as a company, the level of complexity required plays a really big role in what you need. So you are an operator and you're working with a company that maybe has, 1 to a couple hundred employees. The more simplification and consolidation you can have in the AR, AP world, the better. It's going to make your life a lot easier. As you start to get larger than that, there's a lot of specificity to what's happening, and that might not work anymore. And then to Roy's point, I think that verticalization is the future. I think that's what's been happening in fintech, and we've seen a lot of success there from a variety of different companies. So really understanding, your industry, back how we kick this conversation off, is super important in finding a solution that works for you.
Well, thank you all for your commentary today. We'd love to open it up for questions if we can get some from the audience.